Alright everyone, I'm ready for my next countdown. I'm sorry I don't have a Christmas countdown this year. I hope my Christmas reviews and Christmas everything wrong with videos are enough to make up for that. Anyways, I've noticed that my Mario related videos seem to usually get more views than most of my other videos. And since I did a list of hardest bosses and easiest bosses in the franchise, why stop there? There are some bosses in the series that I need an excuse to talk about anyway, so why not? Now, bear in mind that I do not think that all of these bosses are bad. There are plenty that I hate, but I don't think that way about all of them. I just think they're really annoying at times. So I hope you have a lot of patience because these bosses will test a lot of it. Super Mario 64's bosses are actually quite simple. For most of the time, you just need to punch them or jump on them a few times and they're dead. So when you cross paths with IROC, you're in for a handful of surprises. If there was any boss in the game that fit the term difficulty spike, aside from the final fight, it would definitely be this one. Especially if you thought that in this mission, just standing tall on the 4 pillars was the end of it. As for the boss itself, most bosses in this game are big targets, but these bosses can only be damaged if you hit the eyes on them. And even then, only when the eye opens. And the platform you fight them on is one of the smallest boss platforms in the game, so if you're not careful, they'll push you off the edge of it for an instant kill. What keeps them from being any higher on the list is that, like with most bosses in Mario 64, they go down pretty quickly. And part of the annoying factor comes from the other bosses in the game spoiling us. But I gotta hand it to these guys, they don't die as easily as the rest of them. I'll be honest. Before I first fought Bouldergeist, I was expecting him to be a lot harder than he actually ended up being, because he's one of the bosses that can be fought with the Daredevil Combat in Orbit. We have to face the bosses without getting hit once, and I heard from Alex Roach on his original hardest bosses list, and his hardest Mario bosses list, that he was the hardest of them all. I think the reason I expected him to be harder was because I didn't remember that Mario bosses' attacks aren't as hard to avoid as bosses from adventure and RPG games. Nevertheless, he still gave me quite a hard time. To beat him, you have to spin the bomb boos he throws, then hit him with them. Doesn't sound too hard? Well, these boos spin around you, making it easy for them to crash into something. Especially when Rock Chernobog here summons giant rocks to block their attacks, and when he eventually grows arms. At least his attacks are somewhat telegraphed, so they're not too cheap to avoid. But once again, when doing the Daredevil challenge with him, he will kill you instantly. So you'd better prepare yourself, or else you'll be flattened in an instant. I really wish more people would talk about Yoshi's Island DS. This game is just a lot of fun with all the new additions added to the game, yet no one ever talks about it. And even when they do, it's usually in a negative light. However, there is one complaint towards it that I think I might be able to agree on. The difficulty can definitely be pretty overwhelming at times. And those of you who saw both of my annoying bosses lists will probably know that I am in fact talking about Big Bungee Piranha. When we open up with an instance of Kamek, who is the enemy, literally blabbing out this boss's weakness to you, already I feel like my brain cells have been killed off by just how stupid Kamek can be for someone who knows magic. But even in spite of his weakness being obvious, Big Bungee Piranha will still be very painful to fight. To beat him, you have to push the chomp rock under him when he dives down so he breaks his teeth on it so you can shoot an egg at its tongue. It doesn't really get too mind-blowing until the last hit, where he moves at the speed of a leopard, making it really hard to push the chomp rock into position before he dives down. How can a plant move this fast anyway? Unless he's part Whimsicott or Jumpluff, that shouldn't be possible. Well, whatever the reason, you'd better think fast or else you'll end up as plant fertilizer. Serrano Beach is actually one of my favorite levels in Super Mario Sunshine. It has such a relaxing atmosphere, and the idea of using different pathways to go through hotel rooms is a pretty neat idea. There's just one catch though. In order to check into this hotel, you don't need to spend any money, you have to survive a battle with this thing. Phantom Manta, also known as the Manta Storm, will spread electric goop around the beach when, if you touch it, you get electrocuted. And whenever you damage it, it splits into 2 smaller manta rays. It's kind of like the fight with Marching Mild, except much more hazardous because they'll go in different directions, leaving behind more electric goop until the entire battlefield is one giant electric waste dump. At least you can get rid of some of the goop by spraying it, but you can only clean up so much of it at once without having to refill your water supply. And when they all come after you, you'd better be ready for it, especially since these things toss you around everywhere, making it hard to move. It's admittedly kind of fun with the way the fight plays, but if you don't know what you're doing, you'll be in for quite a shock. Even though Origami King didn't get as much backlash as Sticker Star and Color Splash, one thing that some people have complained about is how half the bosses in the game are against objects such as a stapler, colored pencils, and the most annoying of them all, the tape. At first it's pretty simple, but when the next phase of the fight hits, you're in for a sticky situation. Now he's going to roll around the battlefield, taping up several tiles, hindering the amount of things you can do in the battle, and even making some unmovable. So now there's not much strategy to this battle, so you have to watch as he tapes up more and more of the tiles until there's practically nothing you can do, except wait for the fire elemental space to show up, for it's the only way to get rid of the tape. But even then, it only works if you find the on switch first, and reaching both the on switch and the elemental space is made a much more difficult task with the taped up battlefield. But even with the worst part of the way, that's not where the annoyances end. When he gets low on health, he charges up for a super powerful attack, like pretty much all bosses in this game do, but you can't use the 1000-fold arms to grab him in this state. And the game doesn't tell you this, so you're probably going to end up wasting a turn by doing this, making you a sitting duck to this attack. So yeah, this boss is a pain. As I said in my list of worst Mario levels, I hate Bubbam Factory because it focuses way too much on luck. Even the level's bosses are about 95% luck based. Both Womp King and King Bubbam are terrible, but at least King Bubbam gives you more choices and has a more interesting design, but Womp King on the other hand will cost you a lot of mini stars. I hope you're ready for a rocky road ahead when you face this boss. It is true that it will always lose, but the challenge of this fight is trying to get more stars than your opponents. You are given the choice whether to turn the platform or not, but that depends on both you and the enemy's choice. The amount of times the platform rotates depending on that makes this pretty much entirely luck-based, especially when Womp King starts turning it too. And if it rotates the wrong amount of times, you lose points, and the opponent gets to stomp all over the Womp which is already on top of you. Just imagine the extra weight being added on top of you right now. It doesn't further decrease your points, it just feels humiliating to watch. At least you can do the same thing to said opponent if you're lucky, but that doesn't make the pain of this fight go away. Paper Gen's Papercraft bosses are terrible replacements for the giant battles. Instead of feeling like a clash between two titans, it just feels like a clash between figures. The song that plays sounds way too dumb, and who in their right mind thought it would be a good idea to run out of energy and make us need to play a rhythm game to recharge, let alone what leaves you wide open to be attacked. And you'll love this part. When you're hit by certain attacks, or when you throw your character, which is pretty much required, you have to go back to it and pick it up. Come on, I already have to deal with the Paper Toad missions every once in a while. No need to add a second recurring annoyance. The worst one is easily Papercraft Kamek. I've always had a bone to pick with this guy, so it's only natural that he'd be the worst. Before you actually fight him, you have to deal with a lot of enemies in the room, including the spiky pokies, which you can't kill unless you throw Papercraft Luigi at them, and even then, that's not enough. You have to make sure that the hammer is the part of him that hits them. Then Papercraft Kamek finally shows up, and he isn't any better. His spells are huge and difficult to move out of the way in time, so if you're regaining power during this, you'll likely get hit. And you see those barriers around him? That means you can't ram him while they're up, so you'll have to throw Luigi at him. But he'll keep moving out of the way, which makes this even more frustrating, especially when he teleports. And, as stated before, you have to waste your time in order to pick Luigi back up. Not to mention, at times, he can increase his force field to an unbearable range, making dodging a real pain. Simply put, this boss stinks. Kamek from Paper Mario Sticker Star is just unforgiving. The first problem is that you have to fight him twice. Well, technically thrice if you include the first fight with him, but that's not too bad. The other two fights, however, you have to have a magical amount of patience to keep your sanity throughout it, because the instant this battle begins, he will turn every single one of your stickers into sandals. That's gotta be one of the most humiliating things that ever happened to you in a Mario game. They do get changed back after the battle, but because whatever moves you use disappear whenever they're used in this game, that means you have literally wasted those moves without even knowing what they were before you used them. So if you were saving an awesome move for a special occasion, then you might as well just forget about that unless you either get lucky or memorize the positions of your stickers. And the music being incredibly ear-bleeding doesn't help, but believe it or not, a certain feature in Color Splash made me hate this even more. In that game, sometimes Kamek will appear and either temporarily take away most of your cards, cause them to become permanently worn down, or turn them over so you don't know which one you're using up until it's too late. And yes, that feature is as terrible as it sounds. So why am I bringing that up? Because it's all this battle's fault we have to put up with that. This boss battle literally crippled Color Splash's chances of getting anything higher than a C+ in my book. But because it's not part of this fight, only inspired by this fight, that's why this entry isn't higher. Pretty surprising that this list doesn't have more Bowser entries, considering that was the case with my list of hardest and easiest Mario bosses. But I guess he was destined to show up at least once. So yeah, Bowser X from Bowser's Inside Story has a lot of attacks that are super annoying, including some attacks that are very fast and seem near impossible to dodge, and the attack where he turns huge and breathes fire, where in addition to having to avoid it when it's being breathed at you, you also get chased by him and have to jump over the fire that appears like half a second before you have to jump over it. Especially if you hit it, because then your characters become uneven for the rest of the move, making dodging difficult. And after you hit Bowser with a brother's attack, he inhales it and you can't use it for a while, so I hope you've gotten every single attack piece and studied how to use them properly, including the Super Bouncer, which is really hard to perfect, and the Spin Pipe where you have to keep watching it spin, making you dizzy. In the DS version, there's also the matter of the Challenge Medal, which makes the bosses twice as hard, and in the 3DS version, when he runs low on HP, he literally restores all of his health. I just want to have a conversation with whatever moron thought it would be a good idea to do that. Thanks to that, I'm actually happy that the Challenge Medal no longer functions the way it used to. I haven't faced him in the 3DS version, and thank goodness for that. I know it's weird to include the 3DS version as part of the fight since I haven't played that version, but because I already suffered through the agonizing fight with him in the DS version, I think I have good enough reasons to put him at this spot on the list. Before we get to number 1, let me list off some honorable mentions. Hookbill the Koopa. When you damage him, he uses a super fast Shell Slam attack which can knock off some stars. But if you hit him to the other side of the screen and then take off right after you attack him, you should hopefully be fine. Kamek from Mario Party DS. I can't remember many annoyances with him, aside from the fact that you beat an evil wizard by using an ink pen to squirt ink in his face. And the way the information says, till he's completely inky, that's stupid. Shrewd Possessor from Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon. The sliding is actually kind of fun, but he gets further and further away from you, making aiming at him a pain, especially when you have to hit the ice chunks in the middle. So betting for Mario Galaxy 2. Even in spite of his obvious weak spot, you still have to time your hit perfectly, and Kingdom Hearts 2 fans know how humiliating it is to be owned by someone that you feel should be easy. Dream Team's giant bosses are also giant annoyances. As Digital Tai said in his worst Mario bosses, they're clunky, the actions have overly strict timing which ends up dragging out the fights, and the fights themselves were already way too long as it is. Most RPG bosses take about between 2 and 5 minutes, while these bosses can take about 10 minutes, for speedrunners. Even if we are giant, it's still just boring, and I bet if you know me, you know exactly what boss I'm giving the number 1 spot. Yep, you guessed it, it's Giant Bowser. He has every single one of these problems I previously listed, but because most of his attacks are way too easy to dodge, that makes sitting through these attacks even more pointless. But if you think that makes the fight easy, that's where you're wrong. Because he still has that Shy Guy attack, which no matter what you do, you cannot avoid this attack. All you can do is repeatedly tap the screen to take as little damage as possible, but no matter how fast you do it, it actively feels like the game only lets you get them off fast enough when it feels like it. And you can't even use the heal command to recover from the damage you took from them, because see this? Bowser's Shy Guy airships will destroy the platforms behind you every turn, so if you stop to heal, they'll destroy your platform and drop you into boiling lava. But the absolute worst part of this fight is this phase right here. Now imagine you're playing the Bumper Balls game from Mario Party. Now imagine it being terrible. That's what this phase is. The gyroscope controls are way too confusing and imprecise. Since you're not using any buttons to control, it's really hard to know how far you should tilt your 3DS in order to get it to work. And that's the best case scenario, because this fight houses one of the worst boss glitches I've run into. If you were unlucky enough to get one of the early copies of this game, there's a good chance that Luigi will be constantly magnetically pulled towards the lava repeatedly until you die. This is one of the most infuriating glitches ever put into a Mario game, especially if you're doing this on Boss Rush, because if you lose to him, you have to fight your way through not only the first half of this lengthy fight, but you also have to go through all 4 of the overly long giant boss fights again before you can get another chance to fight him. Even the Z Keeper was less infuriating than this, because the area you fight him in has cooler scenery, and he's not the last boss in the boss rush, so you don't have to go through as much in order to face him again. I feel like my brain cells have been killed off by this boss fight, and believe it or not, there's another phase. And while it's not bad on its own, I still just want this battle to end already. I never, ever want to fight this boss ever again, because he is hands down the most annoying boss in the entire Mario franchise.